Welcome to Peter's podcast, where we talk about real yoga, actual happiness, and deep living. Thanks for joining me. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Peter.
For those of you who are not in the know, this is Wendy Newton, Yogi Raj of Ishta Yoga, student of polarity therapy, my wife and co-teacher at Ishta Yoga. And we're getting to do a little test of our own practice what you preach right here, because we just recorded 15 minutes of a podcast in which I had not turned on the sound. So we're getting to start all over again.
Whoopee!
And be okay with that. And you'll find that it's especially appropriate because we are talking today about a notion that we are reacting to from a book by Tantrika Christopher Wallace.
Responding to.
I don't know what I said. And he is a teacher of something called non-dual Shaiva Tantra. And this is a very particular lineage of Tantra that has a very specific worldview and practices and scriptural basis. So it's very interesting to look at as something to sort of bounce off and to compare with some of the thoughts that we have from the various lineages that we study. And Wendy and I talk about it quite a bit, so we thought we would share some of that talking with you.
Yeah.
So welcome. Good
Thank
to see
you.
you once again.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to read this little section from his book, Tantra Illuminated. And this is a place where he's talking about the philosophy of this particular kind of Tantra, which is very much like the Tantra that we sell. And so let me just begin. And I think you'll find similarity. So he's talking about something called what we call lila, or the dance of life, or the game of life, or the play of life. And in his lineage, they use the word krida or krida to be more accurate in the Sanskrit. But in this description of the play of life, he says, and I'm quoting from Tantra Illuminated, the Philosophy, History, and Practice of a Timeless Tradition by Christopher Wallace. I'll put notes in the below. The universe is said to be a divine play, not in the sense that it is always fun, obviously, but rather in the strict sense of the word play, that is, anything done for its own sake, rather than for an after-the-fact result. And it is a play in another sense, in that there exists the possibility for joy, which is his translation for ananda, in any and every experience, though some yield up that potential more easily than others. By joy here, I do not mean extreme happiness, but rather a kind of loving acceptance of any given present moment reality. The heart, and he capitalizes that to imply the spiritual heart, has an innate capacity to grant a deep affirmation of whatever is going on in this moment, to envelop the whole of each experience in loving awareness, even experiences that the mind despises. When it exercises that capacity, it is called ananda. So back in the previous time we went through this 15 minutes ago, we decided it would be helpful to go sort of line by line. So we'll just launch right into that. The universe is said to be a divine play, not in the sense that it is always fun, obviously, but rather in the strict sense of the word play, that is, anything done for its own sake, rather than for an after-the-fact result.
So it's really interesting because I feel like we're responding to this quote from Christopher Wallace, as well as our sort of processing of this quote by ourselves in the recent past. So
Yeah.
it's like this lovely, you know, the goddess is screwing with us type of a feel.
Yeah.
You know, play is really kind of one of those words that we all can like have an individual appreciation of, right? Like, and also sort of, I think we each of us have this capacity to play in given fields. Like we cultivate sort of our talents, and we move in the direction of the things that do feel good, but also there are things that come through that are less than playful that we have to respond to as well. And so I think the idea here is that we have to sort of expand our sense of what constitutes play, or what fields of activity, fields of experience for us can constitute play, so that we take in all of the experiences, not just like the ones that we pick and choose because we're good at them, or we like them,
Or we say they're good.
or we say they're good, or we were
Yeah.
told they're good.
Yeah. I didn't want to let, I agree with you 100%. And I didn't want to let slip by the first idea that he's getting at with this first sentence, I think, which is there are a lot of philosophies that think that you're doing something in life, like life is for the purpose of achieving something
Yes.
outside of life, like you're
Yes.
getting somewhere by doing this. Like Mark Whitwell says it so nicely. He goes, we do these practices to get somewhere as though we're not already somewhere. It's a very much a present moment affirmation
Yeah.
kind of a philosophy.
Yeah. There's like a point here too, which is that, the more you do these kind of practices, which are really everywhere in Tantra, in this way of like doing the thing for its own sake, and kind of reaping the benefit of that thing, whatever it is, the more you start to realize, not mentally, but just like experientially, that there's a lot of benefit in it, doing it that way. Do you know what I mean? That doing something for the end goal, right? Like you were saying before in our previous response,
Our
like,
ghost response.
yeah, like in religions, when you're trying to do good things here on earth so that later on you'll be rewarded in heaven, that type of thing. That's a shorthand for many types of philosophies. That,
Including some Indian philosophies that are
yeah,
very karma oriented.
yeah,
This karma is going to come back at you
yeah.
in your next life.
But the sort of like learning to appreciate this type of, you know, um, divine play idea does really have a lot of, intrinsic, I would say, or inherent rewards, meaning it gives us something, and that something is that sense of ananda that we like. You kind of have to jump in and see what it is, and then you start to kind of understand how that works. Because in my experience of practicing, it's like kind of cumulative.
Yeah. Let me read the next section because we're a little more familiar because we've read this through a few times already. And for those who are just joining us, we only read it sort of one and a little bit times.
Yeah.
So in another sense, it is play in that there exists the possibility for joy in any and every experience, though some yield up that potential more easily than others. And by joy here, I do not mean extreme happiness, but rather a kind of loving acceptance of any given present moment reality. And let me just pause there for a moment, because I think right now, at least among people I speak with, there's a lot of anguish and upset and frustration and fear going on. So it's very, it can seem naive and even mean to say, oh, you should just be joyful right now, because there is a lot of pain, and that it's a lot of experiences do not give up this sense of joy easily. And Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, that's the second time I'm trying this. I think I got it right that time. This Hungarian psychologist talked about the flow state, being in the flow, and how this was a way of being so involved in experiences that it almost takes the story out of it. You're simply present in an experience. So whether you're, doing something totally fun for you, or you're, helping someone accomplish something, or you're in a crisis situation and you're called on to pull someone from a burning building, any of these things, you could be engaging with them in such a way that it's almost like that thing and you are merging, which is another description of samadhi, right? You and the thing become like one, and then you're doing it from that place. And that is a place where you have the potential to touch ananda, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I just got lost in a little bit of a reverie. Part of like how I think about this too is that, I think it's really easy for us, I don't know, probably culturally, but, I wouldn't deign to say. But I think it is really easy for us generally to get to, like, when we hear flow state or we hear like engagement, to not to kind of like go to these like big experiences. Like we always want to supersize everything, including experiences of joy or whatever it might be. And these ideas from Tantra can get like sort of pulled into that current. But I think, it's a little bit goes back to this idea of just like anything that's coming up inside of our experience is what's arising. And when we engage with that thing fully and give it its own ability to arise and be and expand and then go away, and like kind of move through those experiences, whether they're like, you just won the marathon, or your dog died, or, like your kid is in some kind of a crisis, or you're like, passed with an A. It doesn't, that the experiences themselves aren't like, we don't, like one experience doesn't give more ananda than another experience.
Yeah.
It's just the unpacking of living and experiencing that gives the ananda, and
The engagement with it.
engaging, being with, listening, doing, letting go. It's about how we kind of show up and do that engaging. And I don't know whether it was in this version of our talk or the previous one. I said it's kind of like how we show up is more important than what we show up for.
Mm-hmm.
But those two things, I think, actually influence each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the proof of the pudding is in the tasting, kind of in this way of being with things, that over time, if you learn and train yourself to sort of approach all things this way, which isn't, by the way, at all easy,
Right.
because we just forget.
It's a practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, it starts to give back, in the sense that you end up opening up more types of experience. I don't really know why that is. It just is that way.
Yeah. For just a simple example, because maybe this seems a little out there for somebody, that you could be happy when something horrible is going on. Byron Katie, who's very good at this kind of practice, right, will sometimes say, like, somebody says something to you that you don't like. And rather than just getting totally immediately swept up in your don't like, she's all about inquiry. So you might have to do some process to get to the next step of this. But the response, rather than I don't like what you said, could be to yourself, isn't that interesting that she would think that? Or isn't that, wow, or that's so different from how I would have thought about that thing. So it gives you another space of engagement to learn more. It doesn't immediately put you on a side, etc.
Yeah. Because, somewhere in this quote is like that, we have to approach things with this kind of loving acceptance.
Yeah.
Not in the sense of, it's okay, I'll deal with it, or, like I accept defeat, or whatever associations you might have with the idea of acceptance, but that it is that way in this moment, and approaching it as something that's an expression of what is, meaning also, like, especially in non-dual Shaiva Tantra, this idea that, like, the goddess is actually awareness, right? That like, we are expressions of all that is, and so the more that we can take that in as part of ourselves, big self, that, we have more capacity not to push things away, and to actually allow them to, like, sort of be like that. We can engage with it,
Right.
rather than pushing it away,
right,
or like stowing it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Where it can, like, sort of fester and start to be like something unconscious that's going to come up again later.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and read that section too.
Yeah.
So, all right. The heart has an innate capacity to grant a deep affirmation of whatever is going on in this moment. Wow. Let that settle in, right? A deep affirmation of whatever is going on in this moment, to envelop the whole of each experience in loving awareness, even experiences that the mind despises. When it exercises that capacity, it is called ananda.
Yeah.
Which often gets translated as bliss in yoga translations, which again makes it, I think, confusing about what it is we're talking about here. There's something blissful, or to follow this line right here, there is something profoundly satisfying about engaging with whatever is going on in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be, it's easier to practice around something simple, like, oh, there's this nice flower, I'm going to stick my nose in it and experience it. And it's harder to engage with, like, my loved one has just found out that they're ill,
Right.
But at the end of the day, those are things that do arise, and that if we're doing this practice, so we want to learn how to practice on smelling the flower, and then we want to be able to practice that in dealing with something that's more difficult that arises in life.
And what you just said really made me think about this whole other dimensionality of this, because bringing what you experience in a flower, or a song you love, or a movie that you love, and bringing yourself now into something that's more challenging, doesn't mean that in the challenging moment you go, oh, but it's beautiful. Oh, but it's a part of the divine plan or something. It asks you to be as profoundly present with what's needed in that moment as well, which might mean silence, it might mean compassion, it might mean assistance, it
It
might
might mean
mean
sadness.
it
It
might
might
mean
mean
pain,
grieving.
and to
That's the
be
thing.
right, and to be okay in all of that,
Yeah.
and not be owned or consumed by that, but to be in the process of processing all of
Yeah.
that as a human, but being willing to do that.
Yeah. I agree. It is a big willingness, and that's kind of the affirmation piece. It's not necessarily an affirmation of X, Y, or Z. It's just an affirmation, full stop. It's
Yeah,
yes, I will,
yeah,
and that's not that's it seems armchair easy, but it's not real life easy.
yeah. And I mean, I think if we were to take this on a little more as a group, so whoever's so inclined to be in this place at this moment, I think it would help us to sort of nudge off of this weird duality that we've got going on, this polarity of opinion, right? Where everyone's on a team and nothing can get addressed because it immediately has to get pushed into this team or that team. This is a thing I like. This is a thing I don't like. This is what you like. This isn't what I like, and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there is a third possibility, and it is um, this capacity for being involved with something painful or something that I'm not, that the mind despises. He
I
uses,
know,
that's
it's
a
an
big
interest.
word,
It
right? The
is, yeah.
mind despises,
Despise.
but is still there.
Yeah,
It's still the reality,
yeah,
right? So to say no, talk to the hand, is really a denial of what we
what
have to
is.
deal with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I know, and it is, you know, kind of a tall order, but it. I do have the experience more often than not that I might sort of be like what who like when we're trying to get Runa, our dog, to like go come do something that she really doesn't want to do, and she starts like going through her paces of like, no, I won't. Sometimes we can feel like that at the beginning of something, but there's this, like, I don't know whether it's just like an innate, like, kind of understanding of how things work, or whether it's like comes from practice. But I do often find that, if I let myself have some of that resistance, then somewhere along the line, I will kind of go, okay, this is, I have to relate to this one way or another. It's going to kind of, I'm going to dissociate, or I'm going to like get obsessed, or I'm going to whatever I'm going to do. But at the end of the day, like if I just sort of get myself to the mat, even though I'm not talking about the mat, um, it will usually resolve, maybe not all the way all at once, like if there's an intractable problem in your life, it's not usually a one and done thing. We might have to like really kind of come back to it and come back to it, and and give it some space, and really show up repeatedly and figure out what part we're not accepting. Do you know what I mean? And do some of that Katie Byron-esque work, however you do that. Turn it around, get curious, listen to your, like, what's coming up for you. And like a lot of people don't necessarily think of all of that as yoga.
Right,
in
right,
our yoga world.
right.
And I really feel like it's important to like remember that, yoga is all the bodies, yoga is all the layers of self. And so I do think that,
In
again,
fact, it's connecting all those
it
layers.
is connecting all those layers. And
Yoking.
yeah, and
I mean,
it's
keep talking.
learnable, it's learnable, it's teachable, and it is actually doable. So yeah. Sorry, Peter's vacated the premises, so we'll just
No, I have a prop. I need to use my prop for this piece of the conversation.
he has a prop. There we go. Make us all one again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does bring together all or more of us. That this is kind of like what we are. If we could say what we're aspiring to or what we're going for, or how we kind of could just, again, there's that word, like sort of perspective or view. Like if we could remember what we're here to do, you
Yeah.
know, that, this
Wow,
is,
you could fly all the way to my
I
screen.
flew,
Amazing.
is kind of what we're going for. So yeah, good prop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not easy stuff, but I think maybe like you brought in that these are those times, and it is. I find helpful to remember, like we don't want to just kind of like obsessively do yoga, like more and more breath work or more and more asana, kind of like without that sort of bigger intention around what it is that we're here to try and do. And we don't want to go into like, what's it going to get me? How's it good for me? How's it going to save the universe? Like this is a real thing to contend with.
And I mean, and also like the Gita is sort of built around a battle and a warrior and a reluctance to engage, and the the whole description of why it's important to engage, right? So it's not saying, and this is so important, none of this philosophy is talking about it's okay that things suck, or it's okay not to try, or it's you always in the Gita, Krishna says it's impossible for you not to take action. Just take action with the right attitude, right?
Yeah.
So find a way that you can engage and do what you think is the right thing to do and be involved with what you think needs to be changed, but also to recognize that this play has built into it many ups, many downs, and you will get them all. You cannot be just a up. You only get the good stuff kind of person.
Yeah.
That is not a reality of a person. So it's about how do you find the ananda given that life will be going up and down? How do you come to the right relationship with those things? And the relationship isn't a static thing, it's a processing thing. It's
Yes.
how do you deal with the fact that you're going to get down and you're going
Yeah.
to be up, and
Yeah. I know. And that I think that the my just going from some as speaking as somebody who has a really pretty much lifelong practice and who has a pretty heavy load of life stuff as well. um, that just kind of being in that, like this kind of like persistence around remembering that big picture, that it is not just about one type of experience or another, and that we have, a sort of a well, or I don't know, like what the right metaphor is, but like usually most of us have like a bunch of internal stuff, like patterning from our childhood that comes up as like coloring on our experience that's like hard to deal with and takes some time also to process. So it's about, for me, like, yeah, we have to be in the battle and not just in the resistance to the battle, but we also have to like do it how we do it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Like it's
Yeah, you have your own role. You have your own gifts. You have your own skill. You
yeah,
have your own whatever. We were talking about this earlier today. Yeah,
yeah,
our culture does not really make a lot of space for approving of the fact that individuals are different and they have different things to give.
yeah,
We tend to value only a certain kind of action, only a certain kind
yeah,
of success, etc.
yeah,
And yet that's really not the way we are built as
yeah. and
people.
and to remember that the Ananda doesn't come as a result of one type of life experience or another,
Yeah.
and it also isn't about a type of reaction that might be culturally conditioned necessarily.
Right. Right.
It's a little bit, I used this word a little more universal in our previous episode on the same topic,
Hmm.
but it's an experience that is uplifting. It's a little bit ineffable. It's a little bit like, I don't know what the right words to use are. Um, but you find it arising when you meet the experience at hand in a way that is kind of opens up the experience and allows it to come and be and recede. And it also can come from opening up some experience that is just purely emotional, like that's what we would call samskaric from the past. That doesn't really have to do with anything that's happening right now, although it usually is triggered by it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that, like, dealing with those types of things also can bring, in a way that lets them release, can
Yeah.
also bring
Bringing them to
ananda.
awareness can bring ananda. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that, it's a real lightening of the load,
Right.
and so whatever, I mean, I honestly think that like a lot of people are just really triggered, their own personal, like, anxiety, fear, frustration, anger, whatever is coming up around all of the dysregulation that's happening
Mm-hmm.
collectively. And so we can just expect that to be the case. And we need to treat ourselves a little bit like more compassionately, not to mention each other, but, start here. And, that's kind of how I see it right now.
Well,
And I am
that's
trying to practice what I preach because it's like a lot. It's a lot.
yeah. Well, I think those are great words to end with. And so treat each other with a little more compassion,
Yeah.
including ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Wen. Thank you for such a lovely
Yeah.
conversation. And we'll
Yeah.
talk
You
again
too.
soon. All
Okay.
right.